how to make, or how I made, a mid-century modern, minimalist cabinet and shelving unit. Let's get into it. I started by jointing and planing the planks that make up the top, bottom, and sides of the cabinet. Gluing 3 planks together to form the panels. Once glued, I measured and cut the pieces with my circular saw to their proper dimensions, which I'll list in the description below. While I sand away some of the roughness left behind by the glue up, I'd like to invite you guys to like this video, subscribe, and if you want a heads up when I post my next one, ring the bell. I love hearing from you guys, and I'm always dreaming up new projects. Anyway, back to the build. Next up, I prepped and cut the cabinet's center support. Once the structural pieces were done, I got to work on the sliding door panels. I decided to add a lattice element to one of the doors. While I only run through a quick recap here, you can see a more in-depth how-to on the lattice in a video I've linked in the top right corner. But essentially, I cut out all the elements, used a mitered frame to hold the lattice together, and tiny lap joints to achieve a nice overlapped look. With the lattice ready, I refit the sliding door panel. The tracks were cut, allowing an 1/8 inch gap at the top so the doors could be lifted and removed as necessary. With the tracks cut, I used a homemade jig to cut the holes for the dowel joints. I added a chamfer to the interior edge of each panel. I also decided that some of the checks in a few of the panels could do with an epoxy fill. Then I gave each panel a finishing level sand down to make final finishes a little bit easier. And with that, it was time to glue. I decided to place the doors for glue up in the hopes that they would help keep it square. With a nice square cabinet, I started work on the feet. Using a taper jig, I cut a slight taper in each foot. Then cut them down to the desired 6.5 inches, as well as cutting out the support frame pieces. With everything to length, I used simple jigs to cut the holes for the dowel joints, and then rounded every edge except those that would sit flush against the cabinet. With the pieces prepped, it was time for yet another glue up. frame was set, I measured, marked, and used countersunk screws to secure it to the bottom of the cabinet. With the cabinet structurally done, it was time to move on to the shelves. I measured and cut the dowel joints in the uprights while the ends were still at 90 degrees in hopes of helping to ensure that the mirrored joints would be the exact same height. After that, I cut the ends to 10 degrees. Using a homemade jig, I cut 2 holes in the bottom of each upright. These will house the dowels that, while they won't be glued together, will secure the shelves to the cabinet. With all the cuts in place, I decided to epoxy some of the insect-created imperfections. And with those all done, I measured and cut the holes in the cabinet that would meet the dowels in the uprights. I used the same jig, which was made so that the dowels would sit perpendicular to the ground. Then I got to work on the shelf panels. With those glued, I cut and prepped the crossbeams that they would rest on. To add a little more gluing surface area, I used a router gouge to make a slight track in each shelf panel for the crossbeams. Then glued the crossbeams and the panels together. I rounded the front edge to give the shelves a more finished look. I thought the back could use a little refinement too, so I added a rounded lip with mitered corners. I then went a little rounded edge crazy, adding them to the uprights and the top of the cabinet. With the rest of the piece coming together, I thought a few handfuls on the door panels would not only add function, but create a cleaner finished product. I drew and cut them by hand, then used the router to make the outside pulls identical. Cut a trough for gluing, used a ball gouge for the finger pulls, and you guessed it, rounded all the edges. With the details complete, I spent an evening sanding each element of the piece. The next morning, I set about gluing the pulls to the doors. And getting the shelves glued into the uprights. Shout out to my forever extra pair of hands. With everything glued, it was time to bust out the local varnish and get to finishing. While the varnish dried, I decided to add a quick shelf to the inside of the cabinet. I used a router gouge to cut a quick slot on each side. Then made a jig to mark and cut the pinholes for the shelf holders, aka dowels. that, I was done. I ended up not having enough lumber dry to do the backing to the cabinet, but I now have some African mahogany waiting in the wings, so I think I see an update video in my future. Thanks for watching. If you'd like a heads up when I post my next video, ring the bell, and I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to like, subscribe, and comment below.